There are places in this world that feel like they were built for forgetting. You drive down a gravel road in rural Ohio, past fields of corn that sway with a rhythm that seems almost too deliberate, and you find it. A farmhouse, white clapboard, a wraparound porch that sags just a little in the middle, and a red barn off to the left that hasn't seen a coat of paint since the Eisenhower administration. By day, it's the kind of place you see on a postcard. The kind of place you tell yourself you could retire to. The kind of place where the cicadas hum a lullaby and the sunsets stretch out like a promise. But the promise is a lie. Because when the sun goes down in Ohio, the silence changes. It isn't empty, it's anticipatory. The floorboards, which groaned with the honest weight of the day, start to sigh with a different intention. You see, that farmhouse, the one with the quilt hanging in the window and the chipped enamel sink, it has a secret. It's a secret the locals don't talk about at the gas station. It's a secret they bury under forced smiles and directions to the highway. They say the walls bleed. Now, you're a logical person. You're sitting here, and you're thinking about rust. You're thinking about old pipes, about iron in the well water, about a stain left by a leaky roof. And that's fine. That's what the mind does. It builds a cage of reason to keep the dark out. But reason doesn't last long in that house. Reason doesn't explain why the blood doesn't dry. Reason doesn't explain why it moves. It starts as a seep. Just a dark, wet bloom behind the floral wallpaper in the hallway. By midnight, it's weeping. By 2 in the morning, it's running in rivulets down the plaster, pooling in the corners of the doorframes like it's trying to decide whether to stay or to leave. You can stand there with a flashlight, watching a crimson trail carve a path through the dust, and you can tell yourself it's hydraulics. You can tell yourself it's pressure. You can tell yourself 100 things to keep the truth from settling into your bones. But the truth doesn't need you to believe it. It just waits. It waits for the precise moment when the moon is highest, when the coyotes stop yapping, when the quiet becomes a physical weight pressing on your chest. And then, it doesn't just bleed. It breathes. You'll see the wallpaper pulse. You'll hear a sound like a heart beating somewhere deep in the foundation, somewhere far below where the cellar stairs crumble into darkness. And that is the question I want to leave you with tonight. Not whether you believe in haunted houses, that's too easy. The question is this: if you were standing in that hallway, watching the walls of a farmhouse in Ohio weep in the dead of night, would you have the courage to stay until morning? Or would you run into the cornfields, where you know, something is already waiting for you to make that mistake? The allure of the ordinary. In the architecture of fear, nothing is more disarming than a setting that feels like home. When we speak of the farmhouse in Ohio, we do not begin with crumbling crypts or fog-shrouded moors. We begin with white clapboard, with a porch that has held generations of summer evenings, with the kind of silence that suggests contentment rather than menace. This is the landscape of nostalgia, carefully constructed to bypass our defenses. Our minds are wired to lower their guard in places that resemble safety. A farmhouse, after all, evokes childhood visits, the scent of apple pie, the simple virtue of rural life. It is a place we want to trust, and that wanting is precisely what makes it dangerous. The storyteller knows that horror lands hardest when it violates something we have already welcomed. If the house looked sinister from the outset, if its windows gaped like hollow eyes and its foundation leaned toward collapse, we would keep our distance. Our instinct for self-preservation would engage. But the ordinary, the pastoral, the quaint, these disarm us. They invite us in. The gravel road, the corn swaying with a rhythm, almost too deliberate, the sunset that stretches out like a promise, each detail is chosen to whisper that nothing terrible could happen here. Yet that whisper is the first note of the lullaby. By grounding the horror in a setting that could be any small town in the Midwest, the narrative traps us in a space we have already deemed safe. We become complicit in our own unease because we have already signed the lease, so to speak, on the belief that this place is benign. The allure runs deeper than mere aesthetics. It touches on a psychological craving for stability. In a chaotic world, we long for places that feel timeless, rooted, unaffected by the fractures of modern life. The farmhouse represents that longing, a return to simplicity, to authenticity, to the land. To discover that such a place harbors something unspeakable is to feel the ground shift beneath our feet. It suggests that no sanctuary is truly secure, that the very concept of home can be inverted into a vessel for the grotesque. This is why the first keynote is not simply about setting a mood, it is about engineering a betrayal. The storyteller lures us with the promise of peace only to reveal that the peace was a mask. And because the mask was so convincing, we cannot easily dismiss what lies beneath it. We are left questioning not only the farmhouse but every quiet street, every charming porch, every place we have ever called safe. The allure of the ordinary ensures that the horror does not remain confined to the story, it follows us, whispering that what appears most trustworthy may simply be waiting for night to fall. That the walls around us exist to protect, not to betray. In the farmhouse in Ohio, the horror does not arrive from outside. There is no creature scratching at the door, no shadow lurking beyond the window, no invader to be fought or fled. Instead, the threat emanates from the structure itself, from the very materials meant to provide safety. This is the violation of the inanimate, and it cuts deeper than any external monster because it dismantles the concept of shelter at its root. A monster can be outrun, barricaded against, or reasoned with in the language of folklore. But when the house becomes the source of the terror, there is nowhere to retreat. The walls that should hold back the night instead weep. The floorboards that should bear weight begin to sigh with intention. The architecture of refuge becomes the architecture of dread, and in that inversion, the story achieves a horror that is existential rather than merely physical. We spend our lives trusting the stillness of objects. A wall is solid, inert, dependable, it does not bleed, it does not pulse, it does not breathe. When it begins to do these things, the universe as we understand it fractures. The violation is not merely that blood appears, but that a wall, by its very nature, cannot produce blood. Blood belongs to the living, to the organic, to bodies that feel pain and carry history. To see it seeping from plaster is to witness a category error so profound that the mind instinctively rejects it, cycling through explanations, rust, old pipes, water damage, in a desperate attempt to restore order. Yet the narrative denies those explanations. The blood does not dry. It moves. It pulls with purpose. It suggests that the house is not simply decaying but is instead animate, possessed of a will that operates outside the laws of biology and physics. This violation extends beyond the visual. It touches the concept of shelter itself. A home is meant to be a place of rest, of closure, of separation from the wild and the dangerous. When that separation dissolves, when the walls themselves become conduits of the grotesque, the psychological impact is total. You cannot fortify yourself against something that is already inside the perimeter. You cannot lock a door against a house. The intimacy of the violation is what makes it unbearable. A monster in the field is a problem to be solved, a wall that bleeds is a reality to be endured. It transforms the survivor into a captive, not because the doors are locked, but because the very space they inhabit has turned sentient and hostile. This keynote also speaks to a deeper, almost primordial fear, the fear that the structures we build to impose order on the world are fragile illusions. The farmhouse is not ancient or obviously cursed, it is a familiar, almost mundane structure. If it can turn, then so can any building, any room, any corner we have come to trust. The violation of the inanimate teaches us that safety was never a guarantee, only a temporary agreement between us and the objects that surround us. And in that farmhouse, the agreement has been revoked, leaving nothing but the slow, wet testimony of walls that remember what they were never meant to contain. The human mind's relentless drive to impose order upon chaos. When the walls of that farmhouse first darken with moisture, when the first crimson rivulet begins its slow migration down the floral wallpaper, the mind does not surrender to terror. It rallies. It reaches for the toolbox of the mundane, pulling out explanations with the efficiency of a survival instinct. Rust. That is the first offering. Old pipes running through the plaster, iron deposits leached out by condensation, a natural, almost boring explanation that restores the world to its proper axis. Water damage. A leaky roof, perhaps, staining the walls with something that merely looks red in the dim light of a flashlight. The mind seizes upon these possibilities because it must. To accept the alternative, that the house is bleeding, that the walls are weeping with something organic and inexplicable, is to step into a reality where reason holds no sway, and the mind is not equipped to dwell there for long. This conflict between the rational and the impossible is the engine of the horror. It is not enough for the farmhouse to bleed, the bleeding must be witnessed by someone who fights to unsee it. The protagonist becomes a laboratory of denial, cycling through hypotheses with increasing desperation. Perhaps an animal has died in the walls, its decay seeping through the plaster. Perhaps the well water has turned brackish with iron ore. Perhaps it is merely a trick of the light, the way shadows pool in unfamiliar spaces. Each explanation is a lifeboat, and the mind launches them one after another, hoping one will carry it back to the shore of the ordinary. But the narrative refuses to let any of them hold. The blood does not dry, and rust dries. It does not congeal, and animal decay congeals. It moves with a sluggish intentionality that defies hydraulics, pooling in doorframes as though considering its next direction. The flashlight beam, meant to illuminate truth, only reveals details that deepen the mystery. What makes this conflict so excruciating is that the mind is not wrong to doubt. In any reasonable world, a bleeding wall is a delusion, a symptom of carbon monoxide poisoning or a waking nightmare. The mind's insistence on finding a logical cause is the very thing that has kept the species alive for millennia. But in the farmhouse, that adaptive mechanism becomes a trap. It keeps the witness anchored in place long past the point of safety, standing in the Hallway with a flashlight, compiling evidence, refusing to flee because fleeing would mean admitting that the evidence has already won. The denial of reason is not simply a character flaw, it is a structural cruelty of the horror itself. The impossible reveals itself slowly, incrementally, always leaving room for one more rationalization. A drop can be explained. A trickle can be explained. But when the trickle becomes a flow, when the wallpaper begins to pulse with a rhythm that mirrors a heartbeat, the explanations run out. And in that moment, when the last lifeboat sinks, the mind is left naked before something it was never designed to accept. That is the true terror of the farmhouse, not the blood itself, but the slow, systematic dismantling of everything the witness thought they knew about how the world works, leaving behind only the raw, unsupported fact of what they see. By day, the house is merely old. Sunlight streams through the dusty windows, illuminating the honest wear of a century of habitation. The floors creak, but they creak with the benign language of settled timber. The walls, stained though they may be, hold their silence. Daylight grants the illusion of dominion. You can walk the hallway with a coffee cup, note the discoloration near the baseboard, and file it away as a maintenance issue. You can laugh at your own nighttime fears, shake your head at the tricks shadows play when the mind is tired. Day belongs to the living, to the realm of explanation, to the comfortable tyranny of the visible. But when the sun sinks below the Ohio cornfields, the sovereignty shifts. The house does not simply grow dark, it awakens into a jurisdiction where daylight holds no authority. Night is not merely an absence of light in this story, it is an active presence, a predatory force that claims the farmhouse as its territory. The transition is marked not by the gradual fading of twilight but by a palpable transfer of power. One moment the house is a structure, the next, it is a vessel. The cicadas, which hummed with daytime indifference, now seem to hold their breath. The silence that follows is not empty but expectant, as though the darkness is leaning in to listen. This sovereignty of night is absolute because it changes the nature of everything it touches. The hallway that was merely dim becomes a throat. The walls that were merely stained become wounds. The blood, which might have been dismissed as a curiosity in the afternoon light, now moves with the authority of something that belongs to the hours of darkness. Night does not simply reveal the horror, it licenses it. The farmhouse's true nature is nocturnal, and in the dark, it operates without pretense. The protagonist, by contrast, becomes a trespasser in a realm where they hold no rights. Their flashlight, that desperate symbol of human resistance against the dark, carves only a small, trembling circle of borrowed daylight, and even that circle feels provisional, tolerated rather than respected. What makes this division so devastating is the certainty of its recurrence. The horror is not a single event but a cycle. Dawn will come, as it always does, and the house will retreat into its daytime disguise. The blood will dry to something that could be mistaken for rust. The walls will resume their silence. And the survivor will spend the daylight hours questioning their own memory, wondering if the night was real or if exhaustion finally cracked their sanity. But the night does not need belief to maintain its sovereignty. It returns with the sunset, patient and absolute, reclaiming the farmhouse with the regularity of a tide. The protagonist learns to dread not the darkness itself, but the transition, the precise moment when the sun dips below the horizon and the house remembers what it truly is. Daylight offers the cruelty of hope, a temporary reprieve that makes the return of night all the more crushing. And in that farmhouse, the nights are always longer than the days. The anticipation is always worse than the event. In the farmhouse in Ohio, the horror does not announce itself with a scream or a crash. It arrives slowly, deliberately, demanding that its witness participate in the ritual of waiting. This waiting is not the passive passage of time, it is an active, consuming state of being. You sit in the dark hallway with your back against a wall that might begin to weep at any moment. You hold your breath, listening to the house settle, parsing each groan and tick for the quality of innocence or malice. The minutes stretch into hours, and with each passing moment, the silence grows heavier, more deliberate, as though the house is waiting for you to exhaust your vigilance. This is the ritual, you wait for the walls to bleed, and in that waiting, you become complicit in your own undoing. The cruelty of passive anticipation lies in its refusal to offer resolution. A sudden event, a crash, a scream, a visible apparition, would at least grant the release of action. You could run, fight, or simply surrender to the terror. But the ritual of waiting offers none of these. It traps you in a state of heightened alertness with no outlet, no climax, no permission to flee because nothing has yet happened that justifies flight. You sit in the dim light of a dying flashlight, and you watch a stain on the wallpaper. Has it grown? You cannot be certain. You tell yourself it is the same size as it was an hour ago. But you cannot stop watching it, and because you cannot stop watching, the house has already won. Your attention is its nourishment. Your anticipation is its ritual. This waiting transforms the familiar sounds of an old house into a language of menace. The expansion of timber in the cooling night air becomes the house shifting its weight. The distant scurry of a mouse becomes something moving within the walls, checking on you, reporting your position. You strain to distinguish between the ordinary and the ominous, and in that strain, you lose the ability to trust any sound at all. The silence itself becomes a presence, a held breath, a waiting that mirrors your own. You are no longer simply in the house, you are in a mutual anticipation with the house, each of you waiting for the other to move first. And you know, with a certainty that coils in your stomach, that the house has more patience than you. The ritual is also a form of psychological erosion. In the first hour, you are alert, prepared, ready to confront whatever emerges. By the third hour, your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts fragment, and the line between vigilance and exhaustion blurs. You begin to doubt not only what you see but what you remember seeing. Did the stain move, or did your eyes simply lose focus? Was that sound a footstep or the settling of old bones? The waiting strips away the certainty of your own perceptions, leaving you adrift in a space where nothing can be confirmed and nothing can be dismissed. This is the true horror of the farmhouse. It does not need to reveal itself to destroy you. It only needs to make you wait, to hold you in that suspended state of anticipation until you no longer trust your own mind, until you are willing to accept any explanation, no matter how terrible, simply to end the waiting. And when the house finally does reveal its nature, you are already too exhausted to flee, too hollowed by hours of vigilance to do anything but watch the walls begin to weep. In the farmhouse in Ohio, the blood on the walls presents a challenge that no weapon can answer and no door can shut out. It is the challenge of witness. You stand in the hallway, flashlight trembling in your hand, and you see what cannot be. The crimson rivulets defy gravity, the wallpaper pulses with a rhythm that has no source, the very architecture breathes. And in that moment, the question is no longer whether you will escape the house, but whether you can trust the evidence of your own senses. To trust them is to accept a reality that shatters every law you have ever known, to admit that the world is not the stable, predictable place you believed it to be, that walls can bleed, that houses can hunger, that the inanimate can wake. To deny them is to court a madness of another kind, the slow erosion of self-trust that leaves you unable to distinguish between the real and the imagined, forever second-guessing every perception, every memory, every shadow at the edge of your vision. This is the cruelest trap the farmhouse sets. It does not merely terrorize, it gaslights. It forces you into an impossible position where both acceptance and denial lead to a form of dissolution. If you accept what you see, you become a person who lives in a world where houses bleed, a world where no safety exists, where the ground beneath your feet might turn sentient at any moment. That knowledge is a kind of death, the death of the ordinary, the death of the assumption that has carried you through every previous night of your life. But if you deny what you see, if you convince yourself that exhaustion or carbon monoxide or simple fear conjured the blood, you begin a slow unmaking of your own credibility. Every future perception becomes suspect. Was that really a car pulling into the driveway, or are you seeing things again? Was that really your child's voice calling from the other room, or has your mind begun to fabricate again? The farmhouse, by presenting you with something that cannot exist, forces you to choose between trusting a reality that is impossible or trusting a mind that is broken. The challenge of witness is also a challenge of isolation. You cannot call for help, because what would you say? The walls are bleeding, invites not rescue but a psychiatric hold. You cannot bring another person into that hallway, because if they see nothing, you are confirmed as unreliable. If they see what you see, you have condemned them to the same existential fracture. The witness is rendered utterly alone, trapped not by locks but by the impossibility of testimony. The farmhouse knows this. It does not need to silence you, it knows that no one will believe what you have seen, and that disbelief will erode your certainty more effectively than any monster could. You will leave that house, eventually, and you will tell yourself it was rust. You will tell yourself it was a dream. You will repeat these explanations until they feel almost true. But in the dark, when the house is far behind you, you will remember the way the walls pulsed, the way the blood moved with intention, and you will know that you witnessed something that cannot exist. And the question will remain, coiled in your chest, for the rest of your life: can you trust what you see when what you see cannot exist? The farmhouse offers no answer, only the endless echo of the question, waiting for you to return.